We're live.
Welcome, friends, to Gauntlet Con 2018 and our panel. We have gathered here today the influence of dead and forgotten games, which is also known as we are going to squee about our favorite games that no one really plays or talks about anymore, and why you should maybe go and give these games a second look. I am Rach Shelke of Plus One Forward, and I'm joined today by Rich. Do you want to start us off?
Yes, I'm the other half of Plus One Forward, the Indie Award nominated podcast, Plus One Forward, which is part of the Gauntlet network. Run games and play games for the Gauntlet community. And yeah, after this, I'm going to be running my baseball RPG that I've been co-writing with my buddy Paul. So pretty excited because, you know, baseball's in the air for those few slices of us in the Venn diagram of overlapping baseball and RPGs.
And I'm Misha Bushhager. I'm 1/3 of New Agenda Publishing and one of the curators for More Seats at the Table. It's a newsletter that highlights games by women and non-binary designers. And I blog some on Black Girl Game Works.
I'm Phil Vecchione. I'm one of the co-hosts on Misdirected Mark. I'm one of the co-hosts on Pandas Talk Games. I am a game designer for Encoded Designs and one of the founding gnomes for Gnome Stew.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining me today, guys. So, dead games. Why do we love games that nobody talks about? I mean, I know in my case, it's pure nostalgia, but why do the rest of you still pay attention to games that might be a couple years of development cycle, aren't really actively being produced, don't have any new contents? Why?
For me, it's definitely also the nostalgia factor. I mean, if you'd asked me a couple of years ago, my favorite dead game would have been 7th Sea, but they've resurrected it, so it's no longer a dead game, which like warmed the little cockles of my deep dark heart. But it's the nostalgia of, you know, the first time you played a character that had a certain swagger or had a certain touchstone that let you or feel that system out or feel a little bit like you. And some games, that was the first time you had seen that, and so it kind of sparked that hint of something that made you fall in love with RPGs just a little more.
Yeah, I think nostalgia for sure, right? Nostalgia is definitely part of it. I think that sometimes it's games that do something that just hasn't been done again. I mean, there are a lot of games that, you know, wind up, you know, a lot of fantasy games wind up, you know, kind of being repeated in, you know, iterative cycles through game design. But every now and then you hit on a game that's just kind of weird enough or just kind of alone enough that it's unique in that period of time and just isn't repeated. So I, you know, have a tendency to hang on to a number of games like that, because I tend to, if a newer game does something like an older game, then I tend to drift towards the newer game.
For me, I would say, what is a dead game? With drive-through RPG, with PDFs, how are these dead? Is it because they're not in stores? Guess what? I play indie games, so none of my shit's in stores. Is it because it's not actively played? Guess what? I play a lot of games that aren't actively played. Like, I will search online to try to find examples of play. Avoid vultures. They don't exist. I have to make it. And is that a dead game? I don't know. So are they games that maybe their little rise on the chart, right, was before now? Sure. But yeah. It's okay.
I mean, there's so much game content being made right now that things are going to, you know, fall through the cracks and just kind of exist and go below notice, right? I mean, especially with drive-through RPG, it makes it easy for us to at least now go back and find games that, you know, the creators from like 10, 20 years ago were like, I guess we can release that. So each one of us has gone and looked deep into our hearts and given some thought about what our favorite older, sometimes forgotten game is. and has considered why you, the watchers and listeners, should maybe give these games a second look. And again, we're going to have a moment to spotlight and go into what makes us happy and fangirly or fanboy about these games. So, Misha, do you want to start us off with your favorite forgotten game?
Sure. I'm going to go with Tribe 8, which was this quirky little game that I encountered like nearly 20 years ago when I was still in college. And it was like one of the first games that I had played where there was a concept of a matriarchy, and it was strong, and it wasn't presented as this like evil thing that had to be fought against. And the characters, the character art was pretty diverse, and it just spoke to me on like a visceral level, because there was a certain amount of, you know, sticking it to the man involved in playing it, and that was very much young me, and to some extent still me, but it's one that stuck with me, even though I think we maybe played it for 5-6 sessions, but it just stuck with me, even though I'd never had the book. I never had, I still have like a couple of character sheets in like my dead character file, but I never quite found anything that kind of captured the essence of that again. And so it spoke to me.
What is there a lot of influence that you see from Tribe 8 in games currently being produced or on the market today, as newer games rather?
So I'm not sure is the best answer I can give to that, because I'm not sure how much of what I remember is just, you know, that hazy, hey, this was cool because it was so long ago.
Mm-hmm.
And how much of what I remember is actually what was going on in the game, and not just a byproduct of the group I was playing with. I do see some of the themes of post-apocalypse and rebuilding society and trying to get searching for something kind of nebulous and possibly intangible in trying to recreate the goddesses with the Fatimas in certain games. Like, you know, you can play Apocalypse Worlds, and you could probably bring that world into Apocalypse World, or you could play Dream Askew and kind of do some similar things with it. But I don't think I've encountered anything that quite covers all of them at once.
Mm-hmm. And how accessible is this game today for any listeners who are interested in trying it out or picking it up?
So I went and did a quick Google search. It is available in DriveThruRPG, including all the little source books for it. So that might have to be something that I do the next couple of months. Is go through and rebuy stuff and actually go through and reread everything again.
Barry Cook on the panel channel says that there's even German and French translations of a lot of the Tribe 8 stuff up on Drive.
Nice. It's funny. One of my friends, Brand Robbins, and I didn't find this out until like we'd known each other for like 2 or 3 years. Like I was talking about Tribe. I was like, yeah, you know, I wrote for that. I'm like, no, really? And so there was a tiny bit of fangirl squeeing later. It's like, how did you never told me this? Like, so it's kind of amusing.
Brand's amazing. Was there any other thoughts you want to share about Tribe 8 or anything what was your favorite moment from those 6 sessions that you ended up playing?
Let's see. My favorite, I remember clearly a moment where the characters walked into this town, and there was this kind of beat where all the townspeople kind of like turned and looked at us as one, and the GM at the time was just describing it so beautifully and creepily, and it was just kind of this little bit of horror, a little bit of awe, a little bit of adulation all in one, which it was just a really fun little beat moment.
There's apparently, Ferret had posted in the panel channel that there is a queercore punk band named after Tri-Bait.
Nice.
Yeah, Ferris said that he was browsing an indie RPG music store in Nashville and found the bundle of the CD and the game.
Nice. That is so cool.
Oh wow, I remember there being the woman who wrote Animorphs, I think, released a odd different book series that whenever I think of books and CDs shipping together, because I think some of those novels ship with CDs, I'm like, wow, that is so 90s. I think of that, and I'm like, in my head, it's like really photoshopped cover images. That aesthetic. Oh, that's so cool. Great. When I write an RPG, I'm going to have to include a CD with it. All right. So for our next game that we're going to reminisce, eulogize as it were, I'm going to turn to Phil. Phil, tell us of your favorite dead or forgotten game.
Yeah. So I picked one out. I checked the publication date of it. So it is this year, 25 years old. So now I'm definitely feeling my age with this selection. Because I can clearly remember buying it in the store in the summer of '93. So my selection is Ray Winninger's Underground, published by Mayfair.
Oh my God, that cover!
Oh, I know. I mean, if there isn't anything that says 1993, Mr. Mayhem on the cover of this book. I picked this one for a couple of reasons. So for 1993, it's kind of a crazy game to have been released. Mechanically, it's in line with everything from the 90s. It uses a variant of the same rule set that DC Heroes used. So mechanically, it doesn't really stand out. What really stands out about Underground is first, the setting was kind of a satirical take on if the world had kind of veered off in the 90s into kind of hyper-conservatism and industrialization, and kind of it had a lot of critique on private security firms being hired to conduct war and things like that. And as it turns out, most of those things sadly came true. So it's interesting in some of its takes about that. So its politics are actually pretty radical. It's a game of resistance. It's a game of rebellion in a kind of ultra patriotic world that's gone kind of crazy, which still kind of sings with me today. It's the other thing that was pretty remarkable about it had actually really good GMing advice. I went back and ran this game 5 or 6 years ago, read it cover to cover, read the GMing advice, and was actually pretty shocked about how relevant the GMing advice and how useful the GMing advice was in it at the time. It also has one of for 1993, it had some of the craziest layouts, and I really can't. It won't do it any justice to show you on the screen. But this book was 1993. It was full color glossy. Artwork was done. Some of the artwork was done by the same artist as Aeon Flux. It had sidebars. It had hyperlinks for different words that just had call outs on the side to tell you what page to look certain things up on. It really was an impressive layout and graphical design for 1993. This was not, this was serious work to be done back then. Production quality is really excellent. Even 25 years later, this book is actually in pretty good condition, all put together. But yeah, I loved, what I really loved about this game was it's deceptive in that the game, when you read it when you start reading it, it's about superpowered soldiers who've come home from war. And then you think you're just kind of doing superpowery, things. But what you end up reading and what you find out about the game is that like they come home from war and no one wants them to live in their neighborhoods because they're basically tricked out for war, and they're having problems. They're having psychological problems. The genetic augmentation to give them superpowers is also left. No one wants them in their neighborhoods. They get like put into these basically superpowered ghettos. And then on top of all that, there's a set of rules for improving your community. So the actual loop of the game is like you do things to gain experience points. You spend your experience points to actually make your neighborhood, your communities and stuff better. And ultimately the story winds up being about these people trying to do good when like the only tools they have are like for violence. And it's just this really interesting story. That saying like when all you have is a hammer, every problem's a nail.
Yes.
Like that's what winds up happening is like you're like, well, we need to like get the word out about, we need to get the word out about AIDS in our neighborhood. What do we got in our asset kit, right? Like, well, I can punch a tank. Jonesy can like light stuff on fire with his brain. But it winds up being really interesting in the way it plays out. And I think the game could have been a lot less thoughtful without the community mechanics, but the community mechanics wind up turning it around into something that I think has really interesting depth.
Did you find, and you ran this game, correct?
Yeah, I've run it a couple times.
Did you find that social justice commentary coming up a lot in play? This idea of like, we want to change the world, but we aren't equipped to do that. We don't have those skills.
Yeah. So it winds up coming up in like these really challenging ways. Like the players are like, well, we're going to help out the neighborhood. We're going to go rob a corporation. Like that, like that's the thing like we're good at, right? We'll go steal medical supplies from this corporation and help stock a clinic. Because that's the thing that's the thing we're really good at. And then like they're just people trying to cope with the trauma from coming back from war and trying to like keep their mental instability, because the game does have, and I would think probably if we looked at it today, it's probably a little problematic. There's probably a little cleanup about how it treats the psychological effects of their genetic engineering, but it was a mechanic in the game that you actually had to deal with. Like if you used your powers too much, if you got into too many fights, like your psychological problems would start to manifest themselves.
And what influence have you seen this game have on current games that are being developed today?
So I can say for sure the mechanics for how to change your community were a direct inspiration for me when I wrote Hydra Hackers. So Hydra Hackers has a whole set of rules for how to make your community a better place, and they came, and I even quote it in the book because I came right out of Underground. I've since this game I have been fascinated with the idea of games that have mechanics and rules and such that work on making communities a better place.
Fantastic. So Rich, you now have the spotlight. Tell us of your favorite forgotten and or dead game.
Before I do that, I just want to say when I saw in the notes that Phil was going to talk about Underground, my heart grew 3 sizes bigger. I had hoped that was what he wanted to talk about. And there are a few things that he's talked about what is really amazing about Underground for him. For me, there was some world building there, and I actually happen to have it in PDF. I just want to show just a couple little things. First of all, in the world of Underground, cannibalism is a chic thing. Cannibal dishes have replaced burgers and fries as the cuisine of choice in the United States. And there is an entire like McDonald's franchise called Tasty Ghoul. You can on your driver's license, you can donate your body to Tasty Ghoul instead of science, which I think is amazing. And then there were some other aspects of in-world things, like there was the Systematic Overthrow group, which were some boosted supers and their tracks on a very popular CD. And then an advertisement, this is the last one, but Estrogen. because poverty-stricken streets are into cheap alcoholic beverages laced with various human hormones to intensify its intoxicating effects. It just, these things were such great, sharply written and realized satire that I found it just fascinating, especially if your super character had regeneration. Guess what? You had to eat a tasty cool. So there was this nice little reinforcement of the world within the mechanics that I thought was great. So Underground.
You could also go to McSweeney's. McSweeney's was the other. McSweeney's was the rival cannibal restaurant.
Oh God. And there's like a picture that I won't show you of a guy whose first high school job is he works at Tasty Ghoul, and he's in the back mopping up the meat locker, and you can see, you know, partially mutilated human corpses. It's pretty rough, but yeah, so that's Underground. I just had to squeeze just a little bit with you, Phil. The game that I am about to talk about, people are going to say, Rich, you didn't read what this panel was about, because it's not dead. And it's not forgotten. In fact, it had a successful Kickstarter, and was third edition was released in 2015. So I'm disqualifying myself. You're welcome. When I was
we had a drop.
Yeah, we had a drop. Misha, hopefully she can rejoin us.
Did she message you or?
Going?
Yeah, you can keep going. I'm just, hold on.
Okay.
I'm going to try to message her.
All right.
I'm going to mute myself. Feel free to wait. Did something just happen? Sorry, technical difficulties.
I'll keep talking while you're
keep talking. I'm
going
to mute myself and reach out.
So back in the day when I pretty much, there was like D&D and not D&D is what I played, I started listening to these things called podcasts that a coworker had told me about. And I got in through like a search, and I found about Gamer the Podcasting. And through that, I found out about Durham 3, and I found out about Sons of Kryos. And I heard on Sons of Kryos my very first actual play where someone had recorded themselves playing a game. And the game was Judd Karlman playing what he called Life on Mars. It's a 3-episode thing. And the game that they use, the engine, is what I want to talk about. And it's called Primetime Adventures. So PTA, Primetime Adventures, is a game of television drama. I love it because it was my first real foray into narrative-heavy RPGs. The idea of telling a story with your character, that the mechanics help to tell that story. There are a number of fascinating aspects to PTA that you've probably seen in other games. I'm not going to go through the history of like which came first. I'm going to say this was my first exposure to these things in a way that delighted me and helped to inform my play style from that moment forward. It was the first game I played where players described scenes as if they were actions with a TV frame of reference, talking about shots or, you know, tracking or the camera moving in or a tight shot. Like, I had never seen that before. Everything else was literary. Hey, Misha's back with us. You okay, Misha?
Yeah, my internet dropped completely. Like, the entire house was like...
Cool. I am talking about my game PTA. And by my game, I mean my choice for dead and forgotten games, which isn't dead or forgotten. And by the way, just because we're showing cool stuff, Primetime Adventures cards. Got it in the Kickstarter.
Very important.
So this is the first game where people were talking about things from a TV frame of reference instead of a literary. Before, it was like purple prose and box text, and now things felt much more improv, more live. We were talking in a vernacular that was easier for everyone to grasp. I didn't need to go look up on thesaurus or on dictionary.com or you know, Wikipedia to figure out what the hell it is that we're talking about, because we're within moments of a TV show, and it was brilliant to me. Uses playing cards, which I just showed you, instead of dice. Allow for numbers, colors of suits, the suit types, instead of just a simple, you know, 1 through 20 number value. TV ratings for your series was one of the ways that you could have a social contract and lines and veils all wrapped up into one very easily digestible method And it was also right in the pitch, right? You're going to talk about, is this TVMA? Is this TV-13? And earlier versions of Primetime Adventures listed TV shows that aren't listed in the 3rd edition, but all of them kind of flow through. The idea of playing a game in a predetermined number, a series of games, right? You would choose how long your series would be. Is it going to be a 7-session or 7-episode series, a 9-episode series? I found that to be the first time where people talked about things in you play until you die, or you get tired, or someone screams and flips the table. Like, that's all there was before. You played until everyone quit. That's how long you play this game. Right? You hear me, Phil? You feel me?
You play until the GM gets tired of running for you, and then
play until the GM runs out of plot, and it's like,
or in Phil's case, you play until Phil buys a new game.
Yeah. And then you ask the question, you're like, is everybody really interested in this game anymore? Right.
But the idea of saying, okay, we're going to play a 7-episode series, and that was mechanically reinforced because you had a thing called your screen presence, and you charted that out as a group together. And that screen presence would have a direct and significant mechanical impact on everything, every conflict that your character got into. It helped to give you an idea of what is my kind of role, my screen presence within this particular episode. If I'm at a 1, or between a 1 and 3, I'm more of a support character, right? It communicates to you what you should be doing. It doesn't mean that you can't occasionally take the spotlight, but the mechanics reinforce the idea, and the book communicated to you, hey, this is Misha's spotlight episode. You get 1-3 out of that 7, right? This is the one when your issues, when Misha's character's issues are to come to the fore, and she can either confront them or be wrecked by them. And that is what we care about this episode.
Why are you saying I got issues, dude?
But it's in the game, it's a mechanic, I swear. Dang it, I knew if I'd chosen Phil, no one would have cared about it.
I got plenty of issues, man. I got plenty of issues.
He's got like a magazine rack over there.
That's right.
Bro. But seriously though, screen presences allowing us to have a communication ahead of time going into a game is something I had never seen before. And I really don't see that often now. Like, it's a thing where we communicate as indie gamers who like played together for a while, like, I'm going to step back, but to have the mechanics of the game and that conversation going into the session having already taken place is so fascinating to me. It was really, it adds very well to play.
It's a great tool to keep in the player and GM toolkit, for lack of a better word, just because like we've talked about in +1 Forward about like having like an awareness of how much screen time you're occupying, but that's very abstract and not always easy to teach someone.
Right. And to have it like, yeah, sure, you can jump in and stick your nose in this conflict, but you're only going to be drawing like this +1 card versus the person who's got the 3. So really, it should be about their issue. And for the producer, which is the name for the GM, it is a GM game, I'm sorry, but it's just where my heart lies, and this is my choice. And the producer they know, okay, this is the 3 spotlight for this person. I need to make it about their issue, their conflict, what their character cares about, what they're facing. And the GM not only has that as a communication tool, they have a budget, right? They don't have the entire world to throw at you until they, slash win. The rocks don't fall and you all die. You have a budget that you live by. And so you have some strategic choices from scene to scene of how much you want to commit to a particular action. And it allows you to, as a GM, shape the flow of the story without having a heavy hand, without being obvious about it. You really do. Like, I wouldn't mind if my bad guy wins at this point, but I only got 3 and we've got X scenes to go. So I better play this differently. And that's such a fun aspect of the game. It's not just a narrative game. It's not just a freeform thing where like, nothing has teeth to it because it's all freeform. We can all just talk over top of each other or whatever. And that's one of personal grudges around freeform games is I want a little bit of teeth, I want a little bit of strategy, I want a little bit of mechanics to carry the story forward or to surprise me, to force me into situations that I wouldn't have expected. And I get that out of this game, even though it is very narrative heavy. And then the last little moment of joy from Primetime Adventures that I've literally stole for other games is the idea of next time on. At the end of every session, everyone, all the players get a chance to, it's that end of the episode, credits are rolling, you show next time on so-and-so show, and you get to do a couple little blips, right? A couple little blips of what your character is doing. And I have been just blown away by the things that people have come up for. This is what I want to see my character doing, like seeing dead bodies, or like seeing someone topless and freaking out, like, or ladders falling. I don't know. It's crazy, but it just adds so much juice and gets us excited for the next session that it's delightful. Next time on is such a cool mechanic that I've used it in other games, and it's one of those things that's just a gem. Like most all of Primetime Adventures for me.
So we talked a lot about things you've stolen from other games. What influences have you seen on games that came out after Primetime Adventures that could trace back to this game?
Well, the whole idea of talking about TV at the table, of using TV as a method of describing and framing scenes. I've never seen that before. Now it's just old hat. Like, that's how we play here at the Gauntlet. It's a TV show or it's a movie. Like, that's what's happening. I think that the idea of mixing around Spotlight isn't something that I saw as a direct conversation until Primetime Adventures gave us mechanics to have that conversation. To me, I know that there are a lot of smart, amazing gamers who've already done it and been there, and kudos for you. This is where I got it from.
Amazing. So I guess it's my turn, and I may or may not have understood my own pitch. So I took a game that exists in different forms with a system which kind of exists as Open D6. Hey guys, we're going to talk about D6 Star Wars. It's my baby. I love it a lot. It's really problematic, but it makes me so happy. Why? We'll go into that. So D6 Star Wars was actually the second role-playing game I played. I had played Werewolf the Forsaken before, and it didn't really go so hot. There's a lot of content. We had players with different levels of engagement and buy-in, and the party literally ripped itself apart. So half of the group got shoved in one box and was told, you're playing Warhammer Fantasy, and the other group got shoved in another box and were told, you're now playing D6 Star Wars. So that's how I ended up playing D6 Star Wars, and Werewolf did not really sell me on role-playing, I'm sorry, but my time with Star Wars definitely did. The thing I really like the most, that this is my first exposure to, is this idea of cinematic play, which is touched on a little bit in the rule book. And it's kind of, the way I internalize it is, it's sort of like Rule of Cool, but it's not, we're stuck in a loop of just kind of doing more and more gonzo things. We're doing what looks awesome on screen, but also what makes sense narratively. And the game rewards that to a certain extent if you do it properly. So something that we've seen in Star Wars games after is this whole idea of light side points or force points and dark side points. Dark side points are kind of a punishment currency if you do something that is a little bit narratively more dubious, or if you do something that's kind of in the dark side of the force. You get those dark side points. And if you get enough of those, your character actually levels out of being a PC and comes back as an antagonist later, which is super cool. Your force points, or your light side points, for most characters, are something you do when the situation is absolutely dire. In the case of West End Star Wars, you burn your force points to double your roll. So you might be throwing, because it's a game that's based off of D6 mechanic and a big pools of D6s. So instead of throwing 4 or 5 D6s, you're then throwing 8 or 10. And you're like, okay, GM, tell me that I can't do this anymore. And that's usually like your big scenes where the stakes are really high. You got to do something reckless and ridiculous. For example, because I always have really strange game stories. There was once where I was playing a character who was an ex-Imperial, and my friend was playing this alien creature. She was some lizard alien, and we're like, we're gonna like spend all of our force points now to hack all the Imperial channels and then make a bullshit broadcast where we're gonna try to scare the heck out of everyone into like no longer pursuing us. So I think we had like 30 dice on the table or something ridiculous like that. The other part that I think is really cool is there's a lot of dialogue right now about what Star Wars truly is. This is usually a lot of people who have internalized what the original movies are, what they meant, and why they aren't like the original ones. Okay, so Star Wars has always been kind of weird and throwing stuff at the wall. A lot of what we saw from the expanded universe was actually the fault of D6 Star Wars. Timothy Zahn, when he was writing his Heir to the Empire books, was asked, can I have like a log or an archive of what this universe should be? And he was given like the Imperial and the Rebel source books and told, go make sense out of these. That means that we get some really quirky adventures and content that are based off of people looking at science fiction at the time and going, well, does this make sense? Did Lucasfilm say yes to this? So to highlight some of my favorites, you have the adventure where you can go save the talking seals of their magical underwater kingdom, complete with stormtroopers and scuba gear. At the same time, you also have the game where it's got the adventure where you got the torture rules and whatever the hell is going on in this player's guide. Because God, look at that cover. That is just ridiculous. My favorite, though, is Starfall. Why should you pay attention at Starfall? Well, even if you're not running Star Wars games or games like sort of science fantasy type games, I really think Starfall is an interesting piece of adventure writing. It's an adventure where the PCs are put in a situation that's not really about them. You're on a Star Destroyer. The Star Destroyer has been half bombed out and disabled. You have your escort NPC who's essentially a MacGuffin, and you're trying to figure out, well, why were we pulled into this situation? And you have various villains who have these aspirations, and they don't all sync up. Spoilers for the adventure. At one point, you have this Imperial captain who is like, what do I want to get out of this adventure? I want to fight rebels with an ATST in the middle of the hangar bay. Just why? Has nothing to do with the conflict involving the escort NPC. It also comes with a really cool map of a Star Destroyer. It's my favorite. But yeah, like in terms of getting like inspiration for things that are a little bit wackadoo in terms of running your science fantasy games, I would definitely grab one or two adventures. It might be a little difficult to find these because the license has obviously gone Fantasy Flight at this point. West End, I think, still has the rights to the mechanics. It might exist as Open D6. But like the books themselves, you're going to have to look around at used bookstores, and online is really good. Amazon used to be a great place to look for it. If you see something that's unusually high in value, typically that means that book is like popular right now, and it may escalate down in value as time goes on. There's a weird cycle with them. I'm not quite sure. Yeah. So we have a question from the YouTube channel. Is Dungeon World dead? Well,
it can't be dead until Discern Realities is finished. So that podcast, as long as it's on, we're good.
Is Dungeon World dead? Having done a year-long YouTube series with it, I don't know. I have complicated feels about Dungeon World. What
are your complicated feels about Dungeon World, Misha?
Well, no, I mean, I if somebody was to tell me that it was dead, I don't know how I would feel about that. I would be like, I don't know if I A, believe that it is, and B, if it could die for me. Yeah. Because I said we did a year-long campaign, recorded it for YouTube, and made some super deep friendships along the way. So I don't know if Dungeon World could ever die for me.
I'm in the same boat, and I have some pretty strong feelings about Dungeon World. I'm actually playing it. I'm actually playing it now, just on the side. Like, no, I don't know. That game still seems pretty relevant. Like, I don't think it's dead yet.
I just played Dungeon World right before this panel, run by Walter. It was Dungeon World, the cartoon. It was basically the D&D cartoon, except reimagined as a Dungeon World cartoon.
Amazing.
Brilliant. It held up. Walter's reimagining of the playbooks, or the classes and some of the aspects to create kid characters and make it kind of cartoonified. Brilliant. That's what's great about Dungeon World. It's eminently hackable. It's a great system to bolt on really cool ideas.
Is there a move for the wizard's hat for pulling stuff out?
Oh, yes, there is.
Oh,
And I
my-
played the wizard, and you basically roll plus int, and even with a 10 plus, you have to choose 2 things from 4, and it's always problematic and
Oh,
brilliant.
it's so good.
Nice.
Yeah,
So
Dungeon World. I haven't played Dungeon World personally in a while, but at conventions I organize, it always does well. It always sells out. We have a couple of people who have improv toolkits for Dungeon World, and we can just say, you're going to start a tavern, you're going to pick a character, we're going to do all of the fantasy tropes, and people love that sort of thing. Like, it'd be very hard to permakill any fantasy RPG with some traction, I think. Comment from Sabine. Kind of liked Everway because it was beautiful and quite freeform. Was it the card one that everyone talks about?
Yep, that's the card one from the mid 90s that I think WotC released.
Yeah, I heard it was a WotC game that had a short lifespan.
I played it once at Gen Con 96. It was it's definitely freeform, and it was definitely before I was into indie games, because I was like, oh, what is going on here? Like, 10, 20 years later, I'd be like, oh, that game is, like, that's cool. That was a cool, freeform style RPG. But in 1996, that was a hard jump for me. But I was still really curious about it because it had cool cards and very evocative art.
Anyone else have any thoughts on Everway?
This is the first I've heard of it, so
Heard of it, never played. Yeah,
it's got that, like I was saying, the Photoshop 1990s aesthetic, if I remember correctly. It looks like that in my mind's eye. It reminded me of there seemed to have been a cycle of things that are kind of like proto games to indie games right now. Bullwinkle and Rocky's another one of those, where it's very bizarro, and you look at reviews at the time, and the language being used to dismiss the game is the same language being used to dismiss certain indie games today, and I think that's funny. From NS Presbyterian, what about the Ghostbusters RPG?
A good game, also a West End game. That one actually holds up pretty well. I have a copy of it and played it, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. Actually, it was still kind of fun. It's super hard to find in its actual printed form. It is ridiculously expensive on the like on eBay and stuff like that. And there's a group out there that made more modernized equipment cards and some ghost dice. The ghost die was problematic because it was a printed die, not it was not inscribed. So the ghost eventually falls off the die. So there's if you Google it, there's a place, somebody made a run of those dice. Like, you can actually buy aftermarket ghost dice that are actually etched and in much better condition.
There's something amusing about aftermarket ghost dice.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's going to be my new band name, Aftermarket Ghost.
Take Ghostbusters, use as inspiration for Inspector's games. Done.
There you go. Nailed it.
No, it was because it's one of those West End games from that license. Right? I think was the original release of that. Was that a box game? Like, it wasn't a book. Yeah, because the box stuff for D6 Star Wars, as someone who owns quite a bit of D6 Star Wars content, is a little bit difficult. There's like an adventure path, and I have all of the books for that big adventure path where it was supposed to be gritty and hard hitting, but core box completely elusive. Have not been. If someone listening wants to sell me their box, I will buy it. Maybe bring it to Metatopia. I'll give you money.
There's
hint the judge.
the mention of a licensed game. Barry Cook from the Panel channel brings up the very salient point that licensed games are at a risk of death and being forgotten. I think that's where we're finding it, right? Ghostbusters RPG, Marvel Heroic. These are the games that get pulled from shelves that is difficult to find online through legitimate means, and that's such a shame. It's a real bummer.
Like three versions of Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
Marvel Heroic stands out to me, but the Marvel Heroic is the one everyone remembers, and nobody talks about Smallville or, God forgive us, Leverage. I had to pay so much money to get Leverage.
Yeah.
Marvel Heroic, Smallville, Leverage, those all came out of the that same that was back when Margaret Weissman was like basically going from one license to another. It was like on a roll.
Misha, you're going to say something?
No, I mean, with the license stuff, as the thing that they're licensed from ebbs from the common parlance of, like Leverage. I mean, I'll sit down and anytime it's on TV, I'll watch it, but it's not something that's on regularly. So it's things that, end up filtering to the back of people's heads. So that the RPGs that are built around those properties tend to do the same thing.
Leverage was an interesting curiosity in terms of licensed games. I paid a lot of money to get that shipped to the US because Leverage didn't really get broadcast in Canada. So the import companies never brought the game up. So I paid something like 80 Canadian to get that book, the book, and then shipped to me it was an all right game. I enjoyed it when I played it, and then I watched the show and it was not what I wanted it to be.
So I think one of the secret strengths of a lot of PBTA games is that the designers of a lot of the games I most enjoy have found ways to pull those tropes from what they couldn't license and kind of throw it into a particular playbook. So you have a chance to play that Firefly in your game, or you have a chance to play that Jedi in your game without having to deal with a license and all the problems of the license. That's one of the things I really like. And you can mix and match, right? That's the cool thing about PBTA games is I'll take your Jedi and I'll have my guy from Dune and we'll see what happens when they fight. Roll 2d6, go.
Well, wasn't that like the original playbooks from Apocalypse World are apparently based off the characters from Firefly? Or it's like gaming urban legends I heard. Like they map pretty much one for one.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
There's a lot of Jane and Gunlugger, I think.
Yeah.
Do we have maybe one more question from the channel?
I will take a look. I think everybody's getting excited for the running horror games that Christopher Gray is hosting.
Ooh.
It's coming up in just a few minutes. I know that Maria mentioned that she may pick up Everway because she thinks it's in her local comic shop. That's kind of cool.
What?
Yeah. And here's the last question. This is from Ferret asking, does anyone expect a game to make a resurgence like Primetime Adventures or Wraith 20th Edition did? So I'll throw that question out. Maybe we could finish on that one.
That's so unpredictable as someone who organizes events. Like, even within the RPG community now, like there are things that are very big inside the Gauntlet community that don't have traction elsewhere. In Ontario, to speak from con to con, there are things that are very big in Peterborough that have no traction in Toronto. I think I've talked around +1 forward. An hour away is a town called Hamilton from me. Powered by the Apocalypse was huge in Hamilton years before it became this big explosion in Toronto. And we're 45 minutes away from each other.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned like 7th Sea earlier. Warhammer has a new edition out. Trying to think of the games that I played when I was... Earth Dawn is still going strong, I think. Deadlands is still playing. So some of the games that I played when I was younger haven't ever gone anywhere. Rollmaster's the one that I think has died, but only because I think the people who ICE was like being weird about making it again or something. Also, Rollmaster should die because nobody should ever have that many charts in one freaking game ever. That was my senior class project as a comp sci major. I made a character sheet program for Rollmaster with like a database and everything to run it so that you could make a character in under, 20 minutes as opposed to the 3 hours it took to read like the entire shelf of books that I have for frickin' Rollmaster. So
that reminds me of, there used to be an online character generator for Traveler, and my friend Peter and I would sit there and see how many belters we had to make before one lived through character generation. But you just click the button, it would just break my heart to sit there and be like, oh, I died again. Yeah. Rich, Phil, any thoughts about games making a resurgence?
I mean, I'd be interested to see if another Marvel game comes back around. I mean, the MCU hasn't decreased in popularity. Like, is somebody out there fishing for another Marvel license possible?
But we have masks. We don't.
I'm with you. Like we got masks. Like I'm good. My superhero fix is all set. I got masks as well. Yep.
Yeah, my answer is I don't really care. Like I don't care if someone else calls a game dead or forgotten. If I can get my hands on it and I like it, I'm gonna play it. The only thing I care about is like Primetime Adventures has failed in the Gauntlet because we run in these like series and it's difficult to get the same 5 people to play for 7 to 9 sessions. That's my only heartache. That's why I want to talk about PTA, honestly.
Rich, you gotta do it like the Love Boat. You gotta have like just a couple people who'll commit to all of them, and then just have different people on like every episode.
This is going to go into like my ongoing discussion about I want the Super Train RPG. I would play the Love Boat RPG or the Fantasy Island RPG, as we have talked about.
Nice. What about you, Rach? Any last bits? Anything you want to do to bring that question home?
Like I said, it's so unpredictable in terms of what's going to be popular where. And you bring up a great example with the Gauntlet, where Primetime Adventures doesn't seem to have any traction. Like I would never dare predict what's going to be big. And again, other examples of, I remember when, for some reason, Savage Worlds became like the hotness. And this was like, God, 8 years ago. And then the replacement hotness was Lady Blackbird. Like, I don't know how you get from point A to point B.
Rich is how you get there.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Well, I think that we are at time. So thank you, everyone, for coming together today and talking and squeeing about our forgotten and maybe dead, undead games that we love and love talking about.
Thank you. That was great.
Yeah, it was fun.
Thank you, Rach.